0215, August 7th, 1944. Just east of a little place called Mortain, France. That's where Sergeant Robert Callahan was. Just a kid, really. 26. 11 months with the 823rd Tank Destroyer Battalion. He was crouched behind his 3-inch M5, the cold rifle, just waiting, listening. The fog was something else that morning. Dense, like wet wool draped over the world. You couldn't see 15 feet in front of you. Everything was grey, just a wall of grey. Callahan. He had zero experience fighting blind. None of us did, really. It's a terrifying thing, you know. Hearing things you can't see. The Krauts, well, they'd committed 4 SS Panzer divisions to this thing. Operation Lutich, they called it. Roughly 200 tanks rolling toward 12 American guns. 12. And those guns, they didn't move. They were towed weapons. 3 tons of steel that you had to manhandle into the dirt. Once they were in position, you stayed or you died. That's just how it was. Life's messy like that. Callahan's, the cold rifle crew, had been there 3 days. They'd built earthworks, camouflaged the trails, stacked the ammunition. I remember the smell of those shells. Oily, metallic, like a machine shop in the rain. Visibility, well, it was 15 feet. After midnight, that ground fog just rolled in and swallowed the whole Norman countryside. The 823rd, they'd fought at Saint-Lô 3 weeks back, lost guns there, seen crews get overrun when armor appeared through the hedgerows faster than anyone expected. Towed guns. They have this one fatal flaw. You can't retreat under fire. You're just sort of stuck. Battalion intelligence said the Krauts were massing east of town. 1st SS, 2nd SS, Hitler's best. They wanted to reach the coast at Avranches. Cut us in half. The infantry held the line, and Callahan had these 12 guns dispersed among them. 12 guns against the biggest armor assault since D-Day. He'd been studying the problem all night. His M5. It could punch through a Panther's side at 1,500 yards. Maybe the front if he got real lucky. But you gotta see him to hit him, right? The fog. It made all that impossible. Radio traffic was dead. Silence. Just quiet. Then the sound started. Diesel engines. No, wait. They were gasoline. Those Maybach V12s. And those tank treads on the pavement. That distinct rattle of Panther road wheels. A sort of chirping sound. Maybe half a mile out. Maybe closer. His crew. 5 men total. Loader, gunner, handlers. They'd trained in Texas, you know. Camp Hood. They assumed they'd see what they were shooting at. Nobody trained them for this. The sound got louder. More engines. A column. Panthers. They moved different than our Shermans. Lower note. Heavier. Callahan started counting them by ear. 1, 2, 6. Maybe more. You're sitting there, hands shaking a bit from the cold, or maybe something else, and the fog just won't let go. You sort of wonder, what are we even doing here? It reminds me of basic training, but not really. Real. The itch of the wool uniform against your neck. The metallic taste in your mouth. Fear. It tastes like a dirty copper penny. Callahan just stared into the grey. Listening. Waiting. He could hear 'em. The engines idling now. Somewhere out there in the soup, the steel was coming. And all he had was a 3-ton anchor and 5 guys who didn't want to die in a French field. Just a wall of grey. And the sound of something massive breathing in the mist. 0243. That's when the first Kraut tank finally decided he'd waited long enough. A giant orange bloom. Bright, right through that thick, wet soup of a fog. Maybe 200 yards ahead. You could hear the shell. Sort of a high-pitched scream, tearing through the air right over our heads, like tearing a sheet of silk. Then another flash. Another tank. They were firing blind, just hoping to hit something. Callahan stood there, his heart thumping against his ribs like a trapped bird. He realized the problem right away. If he could see their muzzle flashes, then those bastards could see his. The first crew to shoot, well, they usually ended up as scrap metal. But staying quiet? Just waiting for the treads to crush you. He had maybe 30 seconds to make a choice. Gamble everything on a shot he couldn't even aim properly, or just sit there. He didn't use his voice, didn't want the sound to carry in that weird, muffled air. He just gave a hand signal. His gunner, good kid, can't remember if it was Miller or Davis. He traversed that big steel barrel left, toward the last orange glow. The loader. He was shivering so hard you could hear his teeth clattering, but he slammed that high explosive round home. Clang. The breech shut. No time for armor piercing. Not yet. Just fire. Fire now or lose it all. 0245. The world exploded. The M5 kicked back, hard, drove those heavy steel trails 6 inches deep into the French mud, and for a second, maybe 3 seconds, the fog wasn't gray anymore. Bright, brilliant white, like a giant flashbulb had gone off in a dark cellar. You could see everything. The twisted branches of the hedgerows, the sweat on the gunner's neck, the terror in the loader's eyes. And then, total blackness again. Smelled like sulfur and burnt toast. It's a sensory overload, really. Callahan held his breath. 15 seconds. They felt like hours. Then it came. An explosion out in the fog. A deep, wet thud. Secondary detonation. Ammunition was cooking off. They'd hit something, Lord knows how, but they'd connected. Only problem was, every jerry tank for a mile just saw exactly where that shot came from. They knew his address now. Callahan didn't wait. He counted to 10, just 10, and ordered the move. "Displace," he hissed. 5 men grabbed those steel trails. They heaved, they groaned, muscles straining against 3 tons of dead weight. Reminds me of that time in basic, trying to push a 2.5 out of a ditch, but with more lead flying. They dragged at the cold rifle 30 feet north, slipping in the muck, digging it in again, just in place, too. The Krauts fired back, 3 of them, all at once. The shells slammed into the dirt right where Callahan had been standing 40 seconds ago. The fog, well, it saved them that time. The Germans were shooting at a memory, firing at where they'd seen the flash, not where the cold rifle was now. A hell of a game. Firing at a ghost, then running before the ghost fires back. Another flash bloomed, 400 yards east this time. Callahan's crew didn't hesitate. They loaded up again, armor-piercing this time. Fired. Another hit. The flash showed a Panther for a split second. Burning. Crew scrambling out into the grey like rats off a ship. The loader was already ramming the next one in. The tactic, see? Fire at their flashes. Move. Fire again. Insane. Pure improvisation. But it was the only option that didn't involve dying in place. Other guns from Company A started opening up too, north and south of them. Each muzzle flash was like a beacon in the night. Each beacon drew a storm of return fire. The fog. It magnified every sound, Made it impossible to know how many Jerrys were out there or how close they'd gotten. You'd hear a rattle of treads and think it was right on top of you. At 0300, the cold rifle positioned maybe 200 yards south took a direct hit. Callahan heard the impact, that heavy crump of metal on metal. Then the ammunition went up. He heard nothing after that. Just the fog. Won the cold rifle down. 11 left. The German column. You could tell by the engine sounds they'd stopped. Moving, stationary, idle. The Panthers were maneuvering, trying to flank 'em, trying to get an angle on guns they couldn't see. And those towed guns, they didn't have armor, just a thin little cold rifle shield. Might stop a pebble, but it meant nothing against a 75mm tank round. Callahan's boys were completely exposed. If a Panther got within 300 yards and had a clear shot, well, the crew died. Simple math. Another American the cold rifle fired, then another. The battle had become a light show in the fog. Orange flashes appearing and vanishing, shells screaming invisible through the grey. Most found nothing, just dirt. But each flash gave you a little more information. Each boom told the gunners where to aim next. Callahan just kept staring, his eyes watering from the cordite and the cold. It's funny how small things stick with you, like the way the mud felt under his fingernails while he was digging in that second time. We were all just kids, really. Fear, it's got a metallic taste, like licking a battery. And the sun, well, the sun was still a long, long way off, so the shells started coming back real fast. The Krauts, well, they aren't dumb, not by a long shot. They saw that muzzle flash of ours and they aimed right for the heart of it. Callahan, he knew we had to move. Right then, not in a minute. Now. But here's the thing about an M5, the cold rifle. It's a 3-ton anchor. A behemoth. It ain't some secret, fancy the cold rifle on a Jeep like you see in those propaganda reels. No, it's a heavy, ugly piece of steel that doesn't want to budge. 5 men. Just 5 men, total. You had the loader, the gunner, and a couple of ammunition handlers. They grabbed those trails, those big, heavy metal arms that stabilized the thing, and they heaved. Lord, they heaved. You could hear it. The grunts, the boots slipping in that slick Norman mud. Black as pitch. Well, grey, really, on account of that thick fog. Your boots can't get a grip on anything. You're just sliding and cursing in the muck. The metal, it's cold. So cold it feels like it's burning your skin right through the wool gloves. We were sweating, though. Cold as it was, the sweat was stinging our eyes. It's funny how small things stick with you. I remember the way the trail handles felt. Sort of greasy from the cold rifle oil and the rain. We weren't thinking about the big picture, about divisions or breakthroughs or Hitler's plans. We were just thinking about that next 30 feet. Just 30 feet north. It sounds like a walk in the park, right? But try doing it while 75s, or 88s, we couldn't tell then, are tearing up the ground where you were just standing 40 seconds ago. The earth. It actually jumps when those shells hit. You can feel it in your teeth. A deep, hollow crump that shakes the marrow in your bones. Callahan's boys. They were gasping for air. Breath coming out in thick, ragged white clouds in the dark. The smell of burnt cordite and wet, churned up earth. It just sticks to your lungs. It's a heavy smell. You can taste it. Tastes like metal. Like you've been chewing on a copper wire or a dirty penny. We dig in again, hasty-like. Shovels hitting rocks in the dirt. Clang, clang. A desperate sort of sound. Then we'd wait. Just wait. In the soup. The Krauts. They kept shooting at the memory of us. That's what it was. Firing at the spot we'd just left. It's a strange, hollow feeling. Knowing someone's out there in the grey trying to kill the ghost of where you used to be. My hands. They were shaking. Not just from the cold either. It's that metallic taste again. Fear. Pure, unadulterated fear. You're exhausted. Your muscles are screaming. But you can't stop. If you stop, You're just another wreck for the salvage crews. So you heave again. One more time. For the guys next to you. Davis. Miller. Whoever was left. Because that the cold rifle is the only thing keeping the fog from turning into a graveyard. Just back-breaking. Primitive. Like something from another century. Just men and iron and a whole lot of mud. It reminds me of a time in basic training. Camp Hood, I think. Where we had to push a truck out of a ditch. We thought that was hard. We didn't know a damn thing then. Back then, we thought we'd see what we were shooting at. We thought it'd be like the manual said. But the manual didn't say anything about moving 3 tons of steel by hand while you're blind and someone's trying to erase you. The ammunition handler, he's got it rough too. Those crates, heavy wood. You get splinters in your fingers, and you don't even feel them until the adrenaline wears off. You just feel the weight of the world, the fog. It just kept swallowing everything. You'd look over at the guy next to you and he's just a shadow with a terrified, grime-streaked face. And you wonder, how much longer? How many more 30-yard dashes do we have in us before our luck runs out? You sort of lose track of time. Was it 5 minutes? An hour? It all just blurs into the sound of those engines. That low-frequency rumble of the Panthers. They're out there, maneuvering. You can hear the tracks clanking, like a giant bicycle chain, sort of. And you're just there, with your shovels and your heavy steel anchor, hoping to God the next flash doesn't find the new hole you've dug. The itch of the lice in your uniform starts to get to you too, but you can't scratch. You just endure. That's the word. Endure. It's just another day in hell, I guess. Life's messy like that. You just keep heaving. 1, 2, 3. Move. 1, 2, 3. Dig. And you keep your mouth shut so the krauts don't hear your breath. The stale taste of K-rations in the back of your throat. It's like dry cardboard. You want a drink, but your canteen is frozen. Well, not frozen, but so cold it hurts your teeth. And that cheap tobacco, the burn of it when you finally get a second to breathe. It don't help much, but it's something. You look at the cold rifle, this big silent thing, and you realize it's the only friend you've got in this fog. It's the only thing that can talk back to the Panzers. So you check the breech again, smooth out the dirt around the trails. You wait for Callahan to see another flash, another orange bloom in the grey wall, and you pray the next move is as lucky as the last one. Funny how small things stick with you, like the way the mud felt under my fingernails, or the way the gunner's breath looked in the dark. We were all just kids, really. Scared kids with the cold rifle. And the fog. It just wouldn't lift. It felt like it was never going to be morning again. Just an endless night of moving 3 tons of iron and hoping for a miracle. Every time a shell hit, you'd think, is this it? But then you'd hear Callahan's voice, quiet, rasping, heave, and you'd heave, because what else could you do? You're in the 823rd, and you've got a job to do. Even if that job is mostly just being an anchor in a swamp. The trails, they're the hardest part. Digging them in, making sure the cold rifle doesn't fly back and crush you when it fires. It's all just weight. Physical, bone-deep weight. And then, what do you think happens? You just wait for the next muzzle flash, and you do it all over again. In the soup, in the grey, waiting for a sun that feels like it died 1,000 years ago. 3:20 a.m., the engines. They were still out there, you know, sort of a low-frequency vibrating hum that stayed in the mud, under your boots. But then something changed, a new sound. Shuffling, the rustle of wet, heavy leaves in the hedgerow right in front of us. You could hear 'em, hushed voices, guttural, Panzer grenadiers. They were out there, crawling through the grey wall of that fog, probing for the cold rifle positions. At the time, no one really noticed how the air seemed to get, I don't know, heavier. Every time a branch snapped, your heart just stopped. Dead. Callahan. He was stone still. We all were, holding our breath until our lungs burned like fire. His ammo handler, kid named Davis, I think, he had his Thompson submachine, the cold rifle, ready. We called him Tommy Guns. He was white-knuckling that Woodstock. Safety off. Click. Funny how a small click like that sounds like a 100-pound bomb when everything else is quiet. Heck, we were just kids, scared, cold. The lice in my uniform. They were biting like crazy right between my shoulder blades, but you couldn't move. You just had to itch and suffer in silence. The krauts were close, real close, maybe 60 feet. You could smell 'em. Stale tobacco and wet wool. That's a smell you never forget once it gets in your nose. It reminds me of that time back in basic. We were playing hide and seek in the woods, but nobody was going to put a stick grenade in your lap then. Now, it was different. Callahan had a choice to make. A real bad one. Fire that Thompson and light us up like a neon sign for every tank in the valley, or wait and let 'em stumble over to the cold rifle. You're sort of trapped between a rock and a hard place. 0330. He made the call. Didn't say it. Just gave a little nod. The Thompson opened up. Rat-tat-tat. Short bursts, lighting up the fog like a series of camera flashes. You could see 'em for a split second. Grey shapes, coal scuttle helmets. 5 of 'em just dropped, like sacks of grain. The rest of those poor bastards vanished back into the grey. But the damage was done. Every German tank commander within a mile just saw exactly where that fire came from. They had our address now. "Displace," Callahan hissed. "Heave, get this thing moving." We grabbed those steel trails again, muscles screaming, boots slipping in the churned-up muck. We dragged that M5, that 3-ton anchor, maybe 40 yards northwest, just heaving and praying. We were still digging those trails back into the dirt when the first 75 hit our old spot, then another, then 3 more in rapid succession. Wham, wham, wham. The ground was just erupting behind us. They were pouring everything they had into where we'd been standing 60 seconds before. By 0400, it was getting, well, it was getting grim. Company A had lost 5 guns total, nearly half our strength. We'd traded them for 9 confirmed tanks. The math, it barely favored us. You see, the 823rd only had 12 guns to start with. The krauts, they had 200. They could afford to lose 9. We couldn't afford to lose 5. The exchange rate, it was a losing game. A hell of a thing to realize. The fog, it started to thin out just a hair as dawn got closer. Not enough to see clearly, but just enough to make out shapes at 100 yards instead of 15 feet. Made it worse, really. Gave those Panthers a bit more confidence. You'd see a shadow move, hear that clank-clank of the treads. And you just knew. They were pushing again. My hands were shaking so bad, I couldn't even strike a match for a smoke. Just sat there in the mud, tasting that copper fear in my back of my throat. Fear. It's got a metallic taste, you know, like licking a lead pipe. Stale K-rations. Cold coffee that tasted like battery acid. Just another day in hell. You look over and Davis is just staring into the mist, his Thompson across his lap, waiting for the next snap of a twig. It didn't seem important then, but I noticed he had a hole in the thumb of his glove. Just a little hole. Funny the things you remember when you think you're gonna die. We were just waiting for the sun, waiting for the light to show us just how bad it really was. But the fog, it just hung there, holding on to the secret of who was left and who was gone. Callahan looked at his watch. Still 2 hours to sunrise. 2 hours in the dark with a bunch of ghosts and 30 tons of German steel. It's funny how small things stick with you. Like the way the mud felt under my fingernails, or the way the gunner's breath looked in the dark. We were all just kids, really. Scared kids with a big-the-cold rifle. And the fog, it just wouldn't lift. It felt like it was never going to be morning again. Just an endless night of moving 3 tons of iron and hoping for a miracle. Every time a shell hit, you'd think, is this it? But then you'd hear Callahan's voice, quiet, rasping. Heave! And you'd heave. Because what else could you do? You're in the 823rd, and you've got a job to do, even if that job is mostly just being an anchor in a swamp. The trails, they're the hardest part. Digging them in, making sure that the cold rifle doesn't fly back and crush you when it fires. It's all just weight, physical bone-deep weight. And then, what do you think happens? You just wait for the next muzzle flash, and you do it all over again, in the soup, in the grey. It reminds me of the time my old man tried to move a tractor in a rainstorm. He just kept digging the wheels deeper. That's what we were doing, digging our own graves, 1 30-yard dash at a time. The silence after a shell hits. That's the worst. It's a ringing in your ears that won't go away. You look at the guy next to you, and his mouth is moving, but you can't hear a word. You just nod and keep loading. Keep staring into the hedge, thinking about the krauts out there, wondering if they're as scared as we are. Probably not. They had the armor. We just had the fog. And now, even the fog was leaving us. I remember thinking about home, about the smell of hay in the barn. It didn't fit, but that's where my head went. Back then, we didn't think much of it. But now I realize we were just waiting for the world to end, and all we had to stop it was a Thompson and a whole lot of grit. Just a wall of grey, and the smell of wet wool and cordite. 0600. Dawn. But, well, it wasn't the kind of dawn you see on a postcard or in the movies. The sky was just this flat, bruised purple colour, sort of heavy-looking, you know? And then the fog. It didn't just drift away like you'd expect. It didn't thin out slow. It just vanished, like someone had reached down and pulled a dirty, wet sheet off the world in one quick motion. And what we saw when that curtain went up, Lord, it made your heart just drop into your boots. We'd been fighting ghosts for hours in that soup, you know, firing at muzzle flashes and shadows. But now the blind fight was over. I looked out over the ridge to the east, squinting against that pale, cold light, and there they were. Panthers. Big, blocky silhouettes against the pre-dawn sky. I started counting them. It was like a bad dream you couldn't wake up from. 5, 10, 20. There must have been 30 of them just sitting there in the haze, their long barrels pointing right at us. 30 German tanks staring us down. And then it hit Callahan. It hit all of us. We'd been fighting in the wrong direction the whole time. Well, not wrong, but we weren't the main event. Those 30 tanks to the east, they were just a screening force, a diversion. The real hammer blow, the main German column, had bypassed our little section of the line entirely. They'd punched through the valley 2 miles south, near St. Bartholomew, and they were already halfway to the coast at Avranches. We were just the bait, the handful of American kids with obsolete guns, holding back a tide of steel so the rest of them could move. It's a heavy thing to realize, you know, knowing you're the piece on the board that's already been sacrificed. The M5, she felt real small suddenly. Real small and real exposed in that open field. My hands were frozen to the metal of the trails. You could feel the cold deep in your bones, past the wool of the gloves, past the skin. That bone-deep ache, you know. Everything was quiet for a second. Just the wind through the wet leaves of the hedgerows. And then the air itself started to change. It wasn't the clank-clank of the tank treads anymore. This low-frequency whistle from the west. You looked up and saw 'em, blue-gray shapes diving through the overcast like hawks, Republic P-47 Thunderbolts, and the RAF Typhoons. I remember the specific sound of those British planes. Sort of a ragged, high-pitched scream compared to the deep, steady thrum of our bombers. They came in low, real low. So low you could see the trees shaking from the prop wash. We were cheering, just hollering like fools in the mud, throwing our helmets up, screaming our heads off. Those pilots, they didn't care about the fog or the German 88s. They were hunters. Pure hunters. I saw one Thunderbolt, big, fat bird, we called him Jugs, dip its wing and let loose with a rocket. Wishboom. The Panther it hit, well, it didn't just burn. The turret popped 6 feet off the hull like a cap on a soda bottle and just crashed back down in the dirt. Then the next one, and the next. The valley turned into a graveyard of burning oil and magnesium in minutes. It's a sensory overload, really. The smell of aviation fuel, the heat from the wrecks. You could actually feel it on your face from 200 yards away. And the thunder of the strafing runs. You're just standing there in the muck, hands shaking, watching the sky save your life. We had held the door, just long enough. The Jerrys, they started to move, but they weren't coming for us anymore. They were racing east, trying to get back to their own lines before the Thunderbolts finished them off. The withdrawal. It wasn't a retreat, a rout, a panic. You could see 'em bailing out of tanks that weren't even hit yet, just running for the woods like rats. Callahan just sat down on a wooden ammo crate. He didn't say a word, just took off his helmet and rubbed his face with those grime-streaked hands. He looked, I don't know, old. He was 26, but in that light. He looked 80. We all did. The adrenaline leaves you, and you deflate. Like a popped balloon. You start to notice the things you ignored while you were busy staying alive. The dull ache in your lower back. The way your fingers are bleeding from the rough steel of the cold rifle trails. The itch of the lice in your wool shirt. Lord, that itch was everywhere. I remember Davis. He was trying to light a cigarette, but his matches were all damp from the fog. He just kept striking them. Scratch, scratch, scratch. He looked like he was going to cry over a wet match. It reminds me of my old man back in Ohio. He used to get that same look when the tractor wouldn't start in a rainstorm. Just a quiet, desperate sort of exhaustion. We'd held him off for 4 hours. Obsolete, death trap guns and all. The math said we should have been dead in 30 minutes. But we weren't. We were just tired. Tired and cold and still here. The Thunderbolts, they just kept circling overhead like guardian angels with 850 calibers each. A hell of a morning. A hell of a morning. You watch the smoke rise from the valley, and you think about the guys who didn't see the fog lift. The silence from the guns south of us. It tells you all you need to know. Life's messy like that. You just sit in the dirt and watch the Panzers die and wonder why you're the lucky one. I remember the smell of the wet grass, and the way the sun finally looked, just a weak little eye in the grey sky, watching us bury our dead. August 9th, or maybe the 10th. It's hard to keep the days straight when you haven't slept in a week. The smoke was finally starting to clear out of the valley, leaving behind that sharp, stinging scent of burnt rubber and oil. We were walking the cold rifle line, just me and the colonel, Stanley Dieter. He was a quiet man, He just walked from one crater to the next, counting the wrecks. 11 guns gone across the battalion, 37 boys. Well, they were just names on a typed-up after-action report by then. It didn't seem important at the time, but I remember seeing an empty K-ration box sitting on the edge of Callahan's second hole. Just a piece of soggy cardboard. Funny the small things you remember. The M5. She was an old gal. 3 tons of obsolete steel. The brass called them death traps, in the reports later on.
Said the cold rifle you couldn't move under fire was just a fancy coffin. They weren't wrong, I suppose. We got the M10s by November. Fast, armored, could actually hunt. But the M10s weren't in the fog that morning. Those death traps were all that stood between Hitler and the sea. Callahan, he survived. Lord knows how. He stayed with the 823rd all the way to the Elbe, fought in the Bulge, crossed the Rhine. But he was different after Mortain. Quieter. He went back to Pennsylvania in '46. I heard he worked at a mill. Just a regular guy with a quiet house and a yard to mow. He never spoke about the fog. Most of us didn't. How do you explain it to people who weren't there? You tell them about firing blind at an orange flash, about the metallic taste of fear in your mouth, and they just nod and look at their shoes. They think it's like the movies. It ain't. It's just weight. The physical, bone-deep weight of moving that the cold rifle,
and the heavier weight of the men who stayed behind. I saw a photo of the memorial they put up near Mortain. It mentions the 30th Division. Hill 314. The 823rd gets a mention too, if you look close enough. It's just a footnote in the history books now. A small action in a big war. But 37 families. Well, they didn't think it was a footnote. They remember the date. August 7th, 1944. We were just kids, really. Doughboys in the mud, firing at ghosts. It reminds me of a time in basic, trying to learn how to read a compass in the dark. We were so lost then. Guess we were still lost in that fog. I can still taste that cheap tobacco sometimes. Feel the itch of the lice in my wool shirt. Funny how the body remembers the itch even when the mind tries to forget the fire. Life's messy like that. You do what you can with what you've got, even if what you've got is an obsolete the cold rifle and 15 feet of visibility. You stay at the trails, you heave, you wait for the sun, and when it finally comes, you just realize you're the lucky one who gets to go home to a quiet house. Robert Callahan. He's gone now. Most of the crew is. The institutional memory. It just fades away, you know, like the fog. But if you close your eyes, you can still hear 'em. The grunts, the boots slipping in the muck, the heavy clang of the breech closing. Just another day in hell. And 37 boys who never saw the sky turn blue again. Just a stone in a French field. And the silence that follows the roar of a 76 now.